Weather this unprecedented storm, the Somali people must therefore understand the grave importance of sustaining the progress achieved over the past two electoral cycles since the end of our transitional government. For the past decade, despite the shortcomings and challenges in Somalia, there have been indirect electoral processes that were largely viewed as peaceful and acceptable to all political stakeholders, leading to a peaceful transfer of power. Unfortunately, this year, the ongoing electoral impasse risks that hard-earned political culture, which is one of the major positive achievements of the past 30 years. Upholding democracy and conducting free, fair, and transparent elections is not a challenge only in Somalia, and while democracy is the most preferred system of governance, we have recently learned that it requires strong and mature institutions to ensure its protection, although it is the citizens' fundamental rights. Citizens around the world have the right to elect their preferred leaders, but sometimes the result of seemingly democratic elections can produce undesired leadership that puts to test all democratic values and ideals. Other times, democracy can be hijacked in the absence of strong institutions. The recent US election is the latest example of how well-functioning institutions safeguarded the world's oldest serving democracy. Therefore, if there was ever any doubt of the importance of strong, viable institutions, the aftermath of the US 2020 election is our lesson. Somalia, as a nation, can affirm in the absence of a strong and viable institutions, individuals take on that role, and we depend on the goodwill of those individuals to prevent the nation from crisis and conflict. The current electoral impasse, simply put, is a situation where the nation's institutions could not safeguard against attempts to derail the very fabric of the social contract that has existed between the Somali people. This has paved the way for grave mistrust that goes beyond fear of mismanagement of the electoral process. And although there was initially an agreement by the federal government and the federal member states on September 17, 2020, on the conduct of an indirect election, challenges arose in the arbitrary management of the implementation phase. These challenges include the unilateral appointment of electoral management committees that included civil servants, security personnel, and known supporters of the current leadership. It also included the undue interference in the electoral management of the Somaliland seats. It included the unrest in some of the federal member states, especially in Gedo and in Beledweyne, as a result of interference by the FGS with the intention of unduly influencing the electoral process. It also included the real fear of militarized election. History tells us that the development and trajectory of fragile countries such as ours are inevitably linked to the management of electoral processes. An attempt to arbitrarily implement an electoral process without the agreement of the majority of the political stakeholders will result in a dire consequence and might have long-lasting repercussions. The main risk of a disputed electoral process will result in a disputed outcome that will not be legitimate in the eyes of the majority of the stakeholders. That would constitute a great setback in a fragile democracy like Somalia. Such an election would also aggravate our already fragile security situation and further embolden Al-Shabaab and other armed groups. The improved political stability over the past 10 years has also resulted in an energized business community, and this will undoubtedly reverse this positive trend impacting the livelihoods and aspirations of our population. Somalia's revival has also been attributable in part to the generosity of our international partners whose public funds are collected from populations who freely and fairly elect their leaders. In the event of an undemocratic and arbitrary electoral process, it is unlikely that this support will continue at current levels. A volatile electoral process would also dampen the recent active participation by Somalia's youth in our country's reconstruction. Ladies and gentlemen, to further paint this picture, Somalia soon will be in an uncharted territory. The mandate of our federal parliament, the backbone of our democracy, expired on the 27th of December 2020. And in 4 days, our country faces a critical constitutional crisis where the president's mandate expires on February 8. Considering both the executive and legislature will have lost the legitimacy to govern, the only solution to avert this looming crisis is therefore an immediate political solution. The focus should now shift to a consensus-based agreement between all political stakeholders. These will include the federal member states, representatives of the government whose term is expiring, the union of the presidential candidates, and non-partisan groups such as civil society, women leaders, business community, youth, religious leaders, and members of the international community. To salvage the legitimacy and integrity of the electoral process, all political stakeholders have to be part of the political solution and agree on the management of the 17th September Agreement, as well as address the constitutional crisis brought on by the expiry of the mandates of the governing institutions. This will require selfless leadership from all stakeholders that puts the nation's interest before personal and political ambition. And while we seek solutions for today's crisis, we must also learn from this challenge so as to not repeat the mistake of the past and rebuild institutions that can safeguard against such situation in the future.